just wanted to start by saying welcome to everyone here. Thank you for sharing your Sunday morning with us at the Firehouse Art Center. My name is Elaine Waterman, and I am the executive director here. The Firehouse is a nonprofit art center in the heart of downtown Longmont on 4th and Kaufman, providing life-enhancing art experiences through exhibitions, education, and community events. Our artist talks are casual chats with artists, curators, members of the creative community, and creative entrepreneurs with a focus on how to build community within the arts. Firehouse Artist Talks give the community a chance to ask questions and get to a deeper level with the art on our walls. We are taping this talk, and you can find it on our YouTube channel, along with our past Artist Talks and presentations. I wanted to start with a couple of updates from the Firehouse. Life drawing is tomorrow and then the last Sunday of the month. We also have weekly art classes and monthly meetings for songwriters, filmmakers, writers, artists, and more. Please check out the mini sandwich board on your way out for more info, or visit the calendar on our website. A shout out to our sponsors, the LDDA, Longmont Creative District, Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Longmont Community Foundation, the Community Foundation of Boulder, Boulder County Arts Alliance, and the Colorado Creative Industries. We couldn't connect our community to creative and life-changing art experiences without your help. If you would like to donate to support our programming exhibits, please visit our website or donate at the front desk. And lastly, in the spirit of healing, the Firehouse acknowledges and honors the Arapaho tribe, the original people of the land upon which the Firehouse sits. We also wish to acknowledge all other indigenous tribes and nations who call Colorado home. It is because of their hardships and sacrifices that we are able to be here sharing this art with you today. The Firehouse believes that we can only grow when we have a better appreciation for the history, legacy, and contributions that the tribes have made, not just to this region, but to the nation. I am so excited to be here today with resident artist Makenzie Davis. But before we dive into the exhibit, I just wanted to give a little background on the residency. The Firehouse Art Center hosts a summer and winter residency each year, working in the South Gallery before a culminating solo exhibition in the main gallery. The artist-occupied program at the Firehouse is intended as a professional development opportunity for emerging and experienced visual artists, where we hope it will bring the artist's work to a new creative level as we also connect visitors to working artists, environments, and processes. Makenzie Davis is a multimedia artist who creates 2- and 3-dimensional works from a reciprocal painting and paper-making process that directly engages the landscape in which it was made. Her practice includes painting large-scale abstracted components of the landscape in which she resides, layering her recycled handmade paper with organic elements over the compositions as a way to draw attention to aspects of the land and culture that have been built upon, layered over, forgotten, or rediscovered. Makenzie also constructs paper-based column sculptures that reflect on important landmarks of connection between Earth and society. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So a large part about art is telling your story, connecting with people through that story, and finding a community where you belong. What is the story you were trying to tell with Lignin? And with the title Homecoming, do you feel you've found or rediscovered your community?
Yes. So, in the storytelling sense, I am really interested in the idea of like overlapping stories, and that there's layers of stories, and that's kind of what creates the landscape or the environment that you live in. So for me, telling that story of like learning my own story of integrating back into the place where I grew up is really important, and kind of learning the story that's already been going on here, like, you know, historically somewhat, but also like even in the past 3 years while I was gone in Hawaii and I was away from my home, and then Homecoming came back, and then, you know, the past year since I got done with grad school, I didn't really have a place to make art very much, and I wasn't really feeling like making art because grad school just took it out of me. And I came back here and I was like, what do I want to do? I don't even know. I just need to like figure out what my home is like again, find some stability, find some inspiration. And so I felt like doing this residency would really, really help me integrate back into this community because I felt out of touch with it. And also to kind of figure out where I have my place here. Because when I was in Hawaii in grad school, the iteration of this kind of same show I did during school there, and I was trying to understand like my context with the landscape there, and also just learn about their community and their culture. And so then when I came back here, I was like, why wouldn't I continue that thought process? Why wouldn't I try to still understand my community, my home, the land I grew up on, and all that in the same way? So I felt like there is no better way than to like further my professional work, but also really, really try to engage with the community. And I definitely feel like I got to do that over the summer. And yes, I definitely feel like I connected with my all the people here, and the idea of a homecoming does hit home because I got to talk to so many people I wouldn't have normally gotten to communicate in this community with as well. So it opened a lot of doors and it taught me a lot of stuff, and yeah, I think that answered that question.
Yeah, and Lignin is probably not a word people use day to day. What does it mean as like a dictionary definition, and then what does it mean to you?
So lignin is a material that at the cellular level of plants, it kind of helps their structure. It helps them stay strong and rigid and formed and have like a structure that holds it up. And it also has to deal with a little bit with how water moves through the plant, keeping it healthy and safe, and things like that. So I thought relating to something that integral to the plant material that I'm using with paper. We talk about cellulose a lot with paper, but lignin is more of kind of the backbone. And then less about flexibility and more about like, you know, that safety and that structure and the thing that holds it up. So for me, it related to the paper and it related to the material that I'm working on, but it also related to the community, right? So the community members are basically the lignin of this show for me and for this whole town. So we're the people, you know, that keep everything going, that make it interesting, that hold up the arts community, and that literally made this show, my show, what it was. Without that, I don't know, it wouldn't have been not nearly as fulfilling for me as a exhibition in general, as a residency.
You mentioned the word structure, and this was not questions to you, but I think it's really interesting because what you've been saying is that you came home and you were trying to find your structure. Like you didn't have your structure, and I feel like, you know, as you're talking about the exhibit and your experience with the community, you really have found like a structure where you belong.
Oh yeah.
So
like the Firehouse in general, you know, there's a lot of things we could talk about with the Firehouse. You know, John Cross, who's not here, and I'm gonna give him a shout out in this video. You're not here. Anyway, you know, he hired me at Front Range, and then Front Range is so closely tied with the Firehouse, and then getting on the board of directors here. Like basically the Firehouse has fueled all of my new inspiration for making art again after grad school. Kind of, it was great, but definitely crushed all my motivation. And so here was a place where I felt safe to explore that again, and actually start reaching into my creative bank again. And so it provided that space. And so in a way, the Firehouse itself acts as the lignin as well. So you were here for 2 months in the backspace. So we have our South Gallery, which is in the backspace of the Firehouse Art Center. And that was your studio space that you used. In those months, how did you involve the community? Yes, so I tried to keep the door open as much as possible and be here as much as I possibly could. And then, of course, the required kind of community involvement, which the events, whatever they were going to be. And I knew that I wanted them to be paper making because it seemed the most attuned to like being able to work with the community and being more spontaneous and having a really interesting process. And so first, just asking the community for their junk mail and just, like all their detritus. So like to recontextualize that material and to get kind of a material that flows through the city already and everybody kind of just has in their hands and their mailboxes and they don't think about it. But it has, even like ads for places in town. Like there's a collective kind of history and life in that material. And then 4 papermaking workshops, which I remember, I think I only needed like 2 or something.
Yes.
And I was like, how about 4? Because I originally wanted there to be more of like, I wanted to learn about Longmont again from the people instead of just assume or just making art with them. I wanted to like hear from people. So I kind of thought, okay, 2 of those events could be conversational or like storytelling. But it turned out that just having them all be paper making was the way to go. And like, learning with people through that process rather than just like having conversations, because the conversations came naturally. But also just seeing how people like interpreted whatever materials they brought to the workshops or whatever materials I provided, and just little composition, like little landscapes that they made while they're reflecting on their, their home was really awesome. And I feel like collectively, Longmont got better at papermaking. Like every time, like every workshop, it was like people had new ideas. They would come back. They would, be like, oh, I want to develop this. We would add new ideas. So it was a very, very collaborative process. And that was just really awesome to experience because I think Nancy Eastman, she did a lot of paper making and she was the last resident. Mm-hmm. And she talked about how she would have liked to make paper back there. And I was like, well, can we? And you were like, yeah, more water on the floor just makes it cleaner.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. And it ended up working out amazingly. And then some people would come back to pick up their paper and I got to talk to them that way. Some people let me use their paper, and so it's opened up a lot of communication that I wouldn't normally have.
And you mentioned like people brought stuff to the papermaking workshop, and I see that we're looking at the wall over there, and during the talk, in the recorded talk, we'll put images as well. But can you tell me about some of the things that they brought in and maybe what those stories were?
Yes, definitely. Some people like would bring in particular plants from like trees that they love the most. Reed brought in leaves from, what tree was it? Olive tree. Eric, you remember? Yeah, olive tree. Because I was like, hey, I was just asking questions like, what's your favorite tree? Because I was working on that tree back there. And people would be like, I think it's this one. And I'm like, well, how about find one in the town and get some leaves from it and bring it in and actually have that actual connection to the actual tree wherever it is in town. And so kind of getting to know the neighborhood and then getting to know some of the plants and things that were there was one of the kind of pathways that people took. Some people just brought some of their own pressed flowers in, so things that they had already worked on creatively as well that they didn't even know what they were going to use it for. Some people, like Andy is a printmaker from CU in Boulder, and she brought just like a bunch of material. She came to the first one, and then the next time she brought her little, box full of all of her collage stuff, and she does collages, and so she started developing kind of a language with paper making that she's going to bring into her thesis work at school, which I thought was really awesome. The piece in the corner was Heather and Raj, which are a couple that came. They came to the first one, and then they had an idea for the next one, which is to bring all their wedding flowers that they had for their wedding, dried flowers. And they're like, we don't know what to do with them. They're going to dip them in resin or something. And they're like, this just seems much more appropriate. So they brought the canvas. I provided the paper, which came from the community anyway. And then they put all those flowers in there. So some people brought googly eyes just because that was fun. And then just seeing people like bring in, different generations, like a lot of grandparents, mothers, fathers, children, seeing, generationally people doing things together was just really heartwarming and nice. And then just seeing people be like, oh, I have an idea for the future with paper. Just seeing like, people being like, oh, I can actually make paper. This is easy. And I keep telling people it's not hard. It's not like that's why it's considered kind of crafty, but you can do all sorts of things with it, right? It's not limiting. It just opens up a whole world. And I think a lot of people felt that way when they were making it.
And those are the community made papers, but then the paper columns,
Yes.
the trees. Can
Yes.
you explain your process on that?
Yes. So those start with cement the cement tubes forms that people use for construction. And I basically, so there's paper pulling, right, which we did with the community in the workshops. And then, I don't know, there's a technical term, paper squishing, smooshing, whatever, smooshing. I think, there's a proper name for it somewhere. But basically smooshing all the paper pulp onto the trees, and which I love because it's the same process. You're taking the pulp and then you're adding pigments, whatever pigments you want to it. I tried to bring a little bit of pigments from locations in town into the trees. Well, they're not all trees, but columns. But basically just however much pulp and, just piling it on there until it felt right was how I worked on that. And sometimes it'd fall apart and all of that. But really it felt like, especially with the first one, which was kind of referencing a cottonwood tree, kind of became a conglomerate of other trees, a little bit of an ash tree, a little bit of this and that. But it has a smell because
Yes.
the paper pulp, if you leave it too long, it starts stinking. And Sage is here. Come on in, Sage. And then so it starts getting organic. It's organic material basically. Just because it's junk mail, if I leave it in the water long enough, it basically becomes soil again. So it felt really nice putting it felt like organic material back onto this tube. It's like that funny metaphor of returning the paper to the tree. So full circle, this junk mail can become a monument of what it once was. And, adding those pigments in there, it felt like another little landscape that I got to create. And then the ones, they're all referencing something, but they're not exactly that thing, right? So the cottonwood tree, and then there's a utility pole or a telephone pole that I was thinking about, which is, a dead fake tree, basically, just re-put into the ground to have a different purpose. That tree started off as the tree right out front, the doors that I was working on. I was kind of looking at that one as much as possible and taking a bunch of dirt from underneath there and putting it into there. But, that one I made in a couple days. So it's swishing. Whereas the first one I got to spend basically 2 months working on. And then the sugar mill smokestack, which I feel like is the most different. It's, the least a live thing. But I could not resist because, it's literally a column. It's epic. It's always, hovering over Longmont. And it might turn into something new here soon. So kind of memorializing that a little bit as well. But mostly paper smooshing, to answer your question.
Awesome. And as far as paper smooshing, when you went to grad school, was that your plan when you were a paper artist and you were?
No, that was not my plan. Stop me from talking too long.
No.
I could talk forever about these things. But going there, I first just knew I wanted to oil paint. And then, so feeling like I had an oil painting background, feeling like I had always painted landscapes, right? Landscapes. But they always had interested me, texturally, the energy, especially tumultuous landscapes, I really liked to paint. So, but I'm always interested in like the process of the formation of the landscape. Like, how did that happen? Just like, you know, the formation of, sorry, Rick, am I not talking too loud? Or I'm not talking loud enough? Okay, I'll talk louder. So interested in like, you know, the formation of the landscape and kind of that deep time history, the very, very long story that created it. So I started gravitating away from just oil painting because it just felt like one perspective. And people in Hawaii were urging me, like, get deeper, you know, really figure out what the landscape is about. And so right before COVID, because I went to grad school during COVID. Right before that, I got a little bit of time to take a reuse and recycling class. And so I got like a 2-week, basically, tutorial on paper making. Enough where I did it and I kind of understood it, but then suddenly we're on lockdown and they're like, but you need to keep making work and you need to come to Zoom classes and prove that you're making work, you know? So I basically started smooshing paper instead of pulling it because I didn't have all of I didn't have the studio, I didn't have the tools, yes, thank you. So I developed a process that was more like, okay, it's not as strong of paper because you're not pulling it through a screen, but it almost feels more landscape because it erodes, it would just fall apart, just however it naturally kind of was created, felt more like the process of the landscape. So, you know, soaking the paper, letting it kind of break apart, blending it, smooshing it with my hands, putting the texture, you know, the textures that we see are literally from my hands making marks. So it felt like reaching out, touching that process. Yeah, I just felt much more like what I was trying to get at. And but then I could not let go of the painting because I love painting. And I don't know, there's also like a nice contradiction between the like oil paint that's toxic but it's there right waiting for you. You could just open it straight out of the tube. You can be more direct with it. And then the paper making being the more like long drawn out process with all these variables. You don't know how it's gonna look. You're giving up some control. So it's in the layering of those two processes that I found it the most interesting to try to push forward.
Very cool. And when you were in lockdown and starting to kind of explore the paper making medium, did you find any artists that were working in paper that inspired you?
So this kind of goes back to like, where are the paper makers? I don't know. I'm just kind of painting with paper. But I was lucky enough. I don't know if anyone knows Mark Bradford as an artist. If you don't, go home and look him up. He's awesome. He's well known. He lives in New York. He was doing a exhibit at the Honolulu Museum of Art, and somehow he knew the curator there was the wife of the printmaker at UH Manoa, and so he came and did studio visits with everybody, which was epic because he's busy and he's, you know, a famous artist, and he's this like. He's like 6'7". He has a huge personality. He considers himself a painter, but he uses paper. And so he layers paper, and he usually takes it from the city. So he'll find like old posters, and you know he'll source things straight from the urban environment. But he'll also, I think, just use a bunch of paper. He does really large-scale paintings that are made of just layers of paper, and then sometimes he'll peel parts of it off and kind of expose areas of the city and the culture, and he was a huge inspiration. And I didn't get to like work with him or anything. He gave me a lot of good feedback. We got to go to his mansion party afterwards and talk to him about stuff, and so he was a big inspiration, which I had already enjoyed his work prior to doing this. Other than that, a lot of people at the time hello. A lot of people from like that reuse and recycling class kind of tried to expand on their paper making stuff as well. So one of my friends there, Nanea, was doing more of a traditional Hawaiian paper making. So kapa, you know, she would beat the paper, it would be straight off of the bark, you know, it was the more Indigenous practice that was happening there, but she was also like, hey, let's just blend paper and do this too. Do you want to smoosh paper together? So then it became kind of a community thing. So while during COVID lockdown, it was like, okay, I'm making paper alone at home. Suddenly, once we were all able to kind of come back together, it became a complete community activity. And it was more about the community member artists than figuring out who makes paper otherwise. So
cool. And so you came back from Hawaii and then ended up working at Front Range. Had that kind of been a plan, like teaching, education, going into education?
So I applied for a couple jobs through UH Manoa that were basically graduate assistantships, and I was able to get the teaching one. And so I got to teach all 3 years while I was there. I just taught drawing. And it wasn't something I necessarily was like, oh, I'm going to teach, because I was really shy and I was like really nervous to public speak, and I didn't feel like I knew how to teach. But then they're like, you learn to teach by teaching. What do you know? Like everything else in life. And then I ended up loving it so much more than I thought I was going to. It was so rewarding and super, super fun. And so I continued with that. And I remember asking John Cross for a letter of recommendation, and he told me, if you go to grad school, I'll give you a job afterwards. And so I graduated, and I was like, John, give me a job. And he immediately gave me a job. And so from there, I mean, that just happened really naturally and nicely, and I love doing it, and I want to continue teaching.
Well, I just have to share, as far as like, I know that we talked about the community workshops, but the feedback from everyone in the community was that you were a lovely teacher and so very patient.
Wow.
And that came from like, from the kids, from the adults, from everyone who came through was just commenting on how lovely you were as, a teacher and a guide through the whole paper making process. So
that's very nice. Because I felt like I was still learning, It's like every new experience I get, I'm like, oh, I'm a chance to be another student again. Even though I teach drawing, it was like, oh, now I'm teaching paper making. Oh, I don't know how to teach paper making. It's like, calm down. You know how to teach paper making. You know how to make paper, so you can teach it. But it was also just, the more I think about it, like a collaboration and just, we're all learning together in this space, and I'm just facilitating it. It was a good way to approach it.
And speaking about learning, in terms of the residency, what were your like biggest takeaways, like the biggest things that you learned?
Biggest things I learned.
If you learned anything.
I didn't learn anything at all. Just wash. I mean, I learned that it is important to keep open lines of communication with your community and get feedback as much as possible. I don't know. I learned to not be so hard on myself. Maybe I didn't learn that. Maybe I'm still learning that. But just to like relax and just realize like this is fun and this is like a privilege to be able to do this, and as much I can learn from other people and keep collaborating and keeping like learning new perspectives and never stop trying to learn about your environment, I think was a big one. And I learned to just like keep creating through any type of mental state that I'm into. Like it's good to give myself breaks, but I'm always like reflecting on life through making, and that's really important. I also learned about all sorts of people and new places in Longmont that I didn't know about, so that was really cool.
What is it? The talking rock?
The listening?
Listening.
The listening rock.
I didn't even know about that.
I didn't know about that either.
This entire rock face that I painted on the back wall, I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And someone wrote about that on that wall, and so I was like, oh, what? That's over by Sandstone? What the heck? I grew up around here. I didn't know that. So, like, really learning things from the community like that as well was the goal, because there's hidden things everywhere, you go through your life and you're like, okay, this is my general routine, and then you forget to like look at the place you live with new eyes and kind of, re-experience it that way. So I think I did a lot of that as well.
And as far as the deadline, because you were here for a shorter amount of time than most residents.
Mm-hmm.
Was that?
Yeah, that was scary. Well, okay, because, yeah, like, if you look at my thesis show from last year in Hawaii, which was an iteration of this, the first iteration I ever did of this, I basically had 3 years to make that. I didn't start making it probably till the last year, that actual work. But a year versus 2 months is like a huge difference, and I still set the same goals for myself, so I don't know like how crazy I really think I am. Whoa. But so that was a tough one, because deadlines are good, because otherwise I probably would never finish anything, and technically I don't really consider anything finished in here, right? But yeah, it felt like I always needed to be in here. It felt like I needed to go and make as much as I could, because I didn't know how much paper I would have to cover the walls. I only got to paint each of these 3 compositions in separate parts back there. So I didn't ever really know what they were going to look like together until I started setting up during install. Couldn't really tell how many sheets of handmade paper I had, because, you know, if I picked them up and moved them around, they'd fall apart, and I didn't want to like start that process of eroding them and making them fall apart yet. So it was a lot of like, okay, just get as much work done as you can, and then you have like 4 days to figure out how it's all going to go together. And so like, trust the process. That's actually the big thing I learned. It's just, I already had done this once, set up the process for myself, trust that it's going to work out, because, you know, I'm the one making decisions in the end. But yeah, the space, like, I'm so happy that I had that large space back there to work in. Because of this scale, you don't often get to fill this space. So I really wanted to take advantage of the large space I had. But then, yeah, having to work in parts was probably the most difficult part there. But I miss it. I miss the space.
We miss you and your daily burrito.
Yes,
and
my energy.
Yes.
Yes, that was every day.
So where are you going now with your art process then?
So right now I'm still kind of reflecting on everything, but I'm definitely wanting to do small scale or singular works for a while to, well, obviously I won't have the space to create this or the space to display this kind of stuff for a while. So thinking about this in small scale, I think will be my next step. I'd like to get back into my painting process in a way that's different, because this is very loose and gestural and large and kind of expressive, but still trying to be somewhat realistic. So on a smaller scale, I think I would be able to get more like detailed paintings and practice my painting process a little bit more, but then keep that paper making going and continue doing the layering process and seeing what that can look like for like singular pieces that I can put out into the world without it having to all just come down and be destroyed at the end. And then I would love to like keep teaching paper making, you know, workshops if I can. Any community thing that has to do with paper making or continuing this process would be ideal for me.
And as far as teaching, if people wanted to take classes with you,
Yeah.
What classes do you teach right now?
Right now I teach drawing and 2D design, and I, you know, would love to teach more and different things, but that's what I'm teaching right now at Front Range. And then I've gotten some like kind of offers from people like, hey, maybe you should come do some paper making workshops here or there. So I'm gonna see if I can get into that and let the community know if I have any places where I'm doing that as well.
And during the residency, we also discovered that Makenzie is a poet.
Oh. I didn't involve it as much in this process as I would have liked to, and I have in the past. Usually my artist statement is a poem, but you know, it's going to be a little bit more retrospective this time. I did do some writing in there, but I would love to continue, you know, bridging that gap as well. But yeah, maybe I'll come to some poetry nights and read some stuff.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, cool. So we still have time before we do the artist tour and walkthrough. Does anyone have any questions
Way too excited.
Okay.
So what are you gonna do? Like when you take this down, like what are you gonna do with
I'm
it?
just gonna wrap it all around me and just become a paper. Well, I'm going to give away these pieces to people who want them. So I had this idea, like, what if I just kept recycling the same material over and over?
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, so like, it would be a really cool idea to literally just see how far can one show go? Like, can I blend all this up and make it into more and make it into more and more? It's harder to paint like this on this recycled paper, obviously. Mm-hmm. So it would have to be different, but I will probably, I don't know, I'll let it come to me, but I do think I'll keep this around for a little bit, but I'll probably just roll it up and then I'll probably shred it later and make it into more work.
That's cool.
You just moved. It's your new wallpaper.
It's exactly. See, I can have the fire. I can never leave the firehouse if I want to. That would be amazing.
You could use that to wallpaper the bathroom in the firehouse.
Ah.
I mean, if anybody has ideas, please, because it is kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think the recycled paper, that's really easy to recycle. If people don't want that, I can just easily crumble it, make it into more. That came straight from the community anyway. That was the material they gave to me. So giving that back seems natural. But yeah, as far as the paintings, I don't know. It's weird because when I left Hawaii, I had to leave so much work there too. So I've been really good at just letting go. Maybe I could make some money someday. I don't know. We'll see. But that's why making smaller pieces will feel really nice again.
And you should keep the smokestack.
Keep the smokestack. I know.
mean, if it's going away, especially.
Right.
You should keep it somewhere, like in town or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm open for any suggestions, honestly. So if anybody has any suggestions, totally talk to me about them. Because otherwise, yeah, good question. I don't know where I'm even going to really keep these in the meantime. Yay.
My question was about, you mentioned like learning, right? And obviously the community learning, but then like you learning. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how much of the, especially as an installation, how much of this you have this sort of vision and then there's sort of the process that's different than what you imagined. Mm-hmm. And we could all list, of course, ways that like this didn't work the way I thought this didn't work. But I'm curious about any sort of surprises that that shifted how this ended up becoming, and then maybe that were like really exciting surprises or things that you didn't expect that turned out better than what you had imagined.
Mm. Okay, this is
I guess what did you like? Were there any like lessons from the material that weren't part of your original, or from the community that weren't part of your original vision?
Well, this whole wall in general, right? Even just in its installation, how I was going to place it, I had no idea. I didn't even think I was going to be able to use the community pieces at first. So that was a very pleasant surprise to be like, hey, do you guys mind? Like, let's put these up. I think they should be seen. I think they're so great. There's even more that I've been kind of rotating some up there on the wall too. This kind of display and like having a piece that I've curated in the space was a really nice thing to do. And yeah, the way I displayed it, the shadows, I find that really, really interesting. I think the community had a lot of ideas, and just like watching what they did in the workshops, just like all their ingenuity, I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about this way to do things. They brought a lot of their own knowledge. A lot of people had done like, oh, well, I've done some paper making, right? It's something a lot of people have done. As far as like the extension of my process, I hadn't used this many pigments before from all over the place. So that was really interesting as a way to see how those would like dry, change, reflect the landscape. And then how I put it together. In my last iteration of this, it was more about the landscapes that I painted were more abstracted, and then the paper that covered them was supposed to be more of like this it's literally covering the landscape and like maybe revealing parts of it, but kind of showing how not everything is seen, even though the whole story is there technically behind it. But this one, it was more about like abstracting a little bit and like complementing the landscapes. So kind of bringing out some of the colors, seeing how they work together more than like having it be a whole new perspective. I did think that these painted landscapes would be more developed, but it turned into like the real landscapes are the pieces of paper that the community made. So that being really what I learned.
Yeah, the paintings feel like an idea,
Right.
and then the paper feels like the actual.
The actual landscape that
Yeah.
became. And that's exactly how I think about it. That's why I chose kind of the most like obvious places to paint, right? So the sugar mill, Macintosh Lake, and then in the center of east to west is the firehouse, right? And those were like, yeah, like that typical, there's the idea of Longmont, and then the reality of Longmont once I came and went through all the workshops was how much the community has their hands in it. And then, kind of disrupting that, but also adding to that, and I think that was just a really nice thing to feel.
And then, Rick, did you have a question?
Yeah, Makenzie, did you, and I don't mean this to sound flippant, did you choose your wardrobe today to kind of be part of your It's really cool.
I tend to sometimes match my art on accident. I paint the colors I like, and I like oranges, peach colors, and all that. Yeah.
I would like to hear a little bit how, I know you worked a lot with Eric.
Yes.
How much of what Eric has to say, how much did you guys collaborate? Or was there a lot of collaboration?
That's a good question. Eric was here a lot because he works here, and also just provided me with a lot of like, oh, I'm not going to get this done. And he's like, you're going to get this done. You're going to be just fine, and whatever happens is meant to happen. A lot of just reassuring me that like I'm fine and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then just bouncing ideas off of him was great. Just being a person who I like your opinion. Got a good eye, What?
I like yours too.
Oh, thank you. So it was definitely like, he would come and make the paper. Sage came, painted. We had a lot of behind
Late
the scenes
night
conversations,
painting
yes,
sessions.
and stuff like that. Where it was really good to talk about. Specifically, Eric left and came back as well. Went to Denver for a really long time. Grew up here and came back, and so we were reflecting on what it's like to be back at our age after having left. How much Longmont has changed, what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to do at the firehouse, how we're trying to show that change and kind of build the art community in a different, funky way. So, yeah.
Do you have any advice for artists interested in being residents in the future? Would you have done anything differently? Were there any huge frustrations or planning issues? If you had to do it again, do you have any big picture things that you would advise people about?
I think it's a little bit hard to do installations in here because of how much things move around. It's good to know that this space is an art center and it's moving and functioning in all those different ways. So that's probably a good thing to know as far as that. Because in my last piece I had a part that spilled out with a bunch of paper, and I thought about that and we talked about how cool that would be, but I also was like, oh, I don't think necessarily this might be the right place for that just because of how much traffic there is and moving around. Otherwise, I think you said for future residents.
Yeah, was this all completely planned out first, or did you kind of do it as you went along?
I did it as I went along for the most part. I had my plan. I had okay, I've done this once, so I know I'll just take that same idea and think about Longmont instead of the place I was before. But then like all the imagery, I just started here because this made sense, right? I was here, I knew that this would be the heart of it, but then hearing from the community about like what's important, the places that are important, kind of seeing, you know, how things went, interacted. I did have to change things as I went, yeah. But just having that general idea is good.
Yeah, as far as like the idea of the community involvement and the workshops and things like that.
That is the biggest thing. So if you want to be part of this residency, I think of it through the lens of the community. And that at first it felt like, oh, it's like I'm having to change my work so that it's community work. But then I realized it always was kind of, and the idea of papermaking is kind of community based, the way that I've always done it. So it's just like reinterpreting that a little bit and being like, oh wait, I can see my art in a different perspective, but it still completely makes sense.
It's like free labor too.
Yeah, it's completely free materials, free labor, you know?
But another thing is it just lots of artists come to the residency with a strong base of community impact, like understanding of their community impact in their creativity and their creative work. But as far as the residency is also for developing artists, I feel like that adds another level to kind of your language when you're making art. So whether you come here with that kind of thinking about that, or the residency helps you develop how to think that way. It's always
Completely. And think about how it's more intentional rather than just like, oh yeah, the community helped me with this, that. No, but it's like integral to the idea of landscape. Things I already had been working with in my mind, and then now literally working with our hands. So you had another question.
Yeah. Also, if people want to find you in the future, like for your future classes in the community, or what you do at Front Range, or just learn more about you, do a website or how do we find you?
You can't find me.
You
can't
disappear. We're like that artist approach.
I'm elusive. I don't have a website yet, but I will soon. And I'm here a lot. I'm on the board here. I'll be around. I'll come to events. If you go to Front Range, you can just look for my name and sign up for my classes. I have an Instagram. Makenzie is probably the best thing to look at, but yeah, I'm going to start developing that stuff now that I have a lot more content. I'm like, okay, I've got good things to put on a website now and continue that way. Eric.
So residencies, and especially here, there's a lot going on with events, with everything throughout. Like, when was the first time that you felt like I did that? Like, I'm having so much fun with the community. Like, when was the first time? Because a lot of it is stressful. You're on a deadline. It's shortened. But like, what moment can you think of where you're like, this is so much fun. This is it.
And that's funny because definitely the first workshop, I was like, because I was a little nervous about it, just like how it was even going to function. Because I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I've done this like a little gremlin in my own studio. Now I'm here like facilitating people, and so many things could go wrong, whenever the first person comes in, and I'm like, oh, but yeah, once I was like literally working with people, talking, doing the stuff, like seeing how people were being creative with their pieces, that night I was just like, wow, this feels great. This is so fun. And like, I felt like I could even be done. Like I could be accomplished. I was like, that feels really nice because whatever it ends up looking like, I truly have like, my goal was to connect and to make art with other people like I hadn't in a whole year. And you definitely get like a little bit of high from all those people coming through and being creative with you. And then you're like, well, I gotta do 3 more of these. Let me get some sleep.
How many people do you think came to the first workshop, the Summer on the Streets one?
Woo!
Came through. Hundreds.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of people. And some people would watch, and some people would make one and leave, and some people would, be like, no, I need to make like a whole body of work here, And then And then the second one was really nice because not quite as many people came to it as the first one. It was a little more focused. And then another summer on the street, which was pretty busy. And then the last one, I thought it was going to be a little more focused again. And then like a bajillion and a half people showed up to that one all at the same time. So I was like talking to like 60 people in that small room back there. But with all the variables, it went so well, I think. And I think that like it shows in their work. And I love having a piece up that's like shows that process and how I was able to like make that happen and kind of like take the ego out of it where I'm just like critiquing my own work all the time. It's like super refreshing to do something that's way above that way of thinking.
Any other?
I just gotta know about the spider.
The spider. Okay, so has anyone been seeing a bunch of spiders this summer?
Yeah.
That's basically it. So I was writing the proposal, maybe I was writing some more ideas about what I was going to be doing. And I was listening to like Native American mythology of this location, and I was reading about how, or I was listening to Audible about how, you know, like when white people came here, Native Americans called them the same name as a spider. And it was really weird because I was also reflecting on, okay, how am I going to like talk about the landscape here and be respectful and all that stuff. And then a spider crawled across my hand. And I was like, what's going on? This is saying something. And then I just kept seeing spiders and then just like, I don't know, feeling in the studio, in my home, everywhere, you know. It just seemed like that the spiders were trying to say something. And they're very, you know, in the landscape. They have a lot of meaning, you know, just beyond just being scared of them. It was a big thing I had in Hawaii where I had to get over my fear of bugs, and that was like another way of connecting with the land and myself. And so there's a couple of those. They're native spiders to Colorado, so I wanted to put those in there. And I wanted to put a lot more of that kind of stuff in there. That was one of those things I would like.
Easter eggs.
Yes, exactly. I wanted a lot of Easter eggs, and also like reflecting, I would have put a lot of smaller broken up pieces throughout the whole thing to kind of connect the larger sheets of paper. There's plenty I would change and do a little bit differently, but
Always.
when you have 4 days to be like, okay, I'm going to place all this, and they're breaking, and they're going, and they're falling, and you know, you kind of just have to say, this has the way it wants to look, and I just like let that happen, and now that's it.
Well, cool. So I think that's enough talking about the work. We can actually look at the work. And if you guys have questions, this is kind of your last chance to talk to Makenzie, ask her questions about the work as you're looking at the work. So I wanted to say again, thank you very much. Thank you to Makenzie. Thank you to Eric. And thank you to Reed, who are my team here at the Firehouse, for helping Makenzie throughout the residency. If everyone would just quickly pick up your chair, and we're just going to put them in the front. We don't even have to put them away. And we will get started with the tour.
Yeah.
Thank you.